So here we are. It's 2 weeks before the election, and we're facing multiple crises, as we all know. Across this entire country, different circumstances, vastly different circumstances in the way that people are suffering, many, many different reactions, but everyone is stressed. Our personal well-being, our national well-being, we so well know, it's being threatened. And I don't think I have to expand on that because we're achingly aware of it. And we also know what we may be facing coming down the road. And I'm recognizing that these days, I think many of us have just added incentive to come to IMCC, is to be together. I'm going to tap in more deeply to the peace, the equanimity that our practices offer. And knowing this, the thought crossed my mind when I was thinking about tonight, that maybe I ought to offer an evening of music and chanting, or maybe even jokes, something to collectively get our mind off of the issues and maybe to relax together for a while. And I'll tell you, I even thought about love songs. A few years ago, I was in India and I attended the retreat center of Mayor Baba. He was a 20th century spiritual leader, and he has many followers in this country and a huge number internationally. So I was there at his retreat center, and love songs, music, but love songs was what they did every day at puja, at their gatherings. And these were so beautiful. I'm going to give you one tiny little example. Take my hand, take my whole life too. I am falling in love with you. Like that. Okay, I messed it up a bit. Some of you probably caught that. But this just blew me away. These were the kind of songs they sang, but they were devoted, each one of them, the songs, to the cosmic beloved, however they understood the cosmic beloved. It was so beautiful. And I thought, what if we did something like that tonight? And then I kind of had to smile to myself and thought, well, this is a bit outside of our tradition. But then I remembered the Buddha's words. He said, gladden your heart. And I thought, this could gladden our heart. Okay, the long and the short of that little interchange was I decided not to do it. But maybe someday, maybe we can do something like that. But instead for tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to focus on the issues. This isn't the place for the specific issues, but I'd like to pay attention to the deeper questions that the issues that we're facing raise for all of us. We all know that the level of emotional reactivity in this country is skyrocketing. There was a recent report by the director of the National Institute of Mental Health, and he said that reports of adults who are struggling with mental health or substance abuse have more than doubled in recent months. He said that typically the American adult population have a 20% rate of diagnosable mental illness, 20%. He said, and Dr. Joshua Gordon is his name, he said now, according to reports, it's almost 41%, more than double. And you got to know that in fact, it's more than that, because these were just reported instances, reported cases. So this is just so alarming for all of us. And viewing this in the context of us, IMCC, and us here on our path, our contemplative path, I think all of us are struggling in one way or another emotionally to some degree. And I do know, and I think you do too, that our practice is a support. We're aware of the negativity bias of the mind. Threat and perceived threats can hijack us. And we certainly see that on a national scale these days, starting with our president, right? The negativity bias of the mind. So easy for us to kind of absorb what's in the environment. But our mindfulness practice, compassion on the other hand, gives a proven way, a proven ability to tolerate stress. That's what we are doing. We have learned how to do that. We're learning to become more resilient. It allows us to heal neurobiologically. And a lot of times, I mean, we often discuss this, even before the current crises. And I know that a few weeks ago, Sharon gave a fine talk about emotional dysregulation, the polyvagal system, and contemplative practice. They all weave together. And we are practicing together, even if we don't know the words or understand the mechanism of the polyvagal system. So all of this being acknowledged, all of this being said, I also want to observe that we have all heard stories about people in crisis. And we know that, we've heard many stories about people reporting that when their life is just sinking into the pits, maybe they've lost a job, or their marriage or significant relationship is tanking, or they have maybe a combination of all of them, a serious diagnosis, going through huge stress. And then many say afterwards, it was the best thing that could have happened. The best thing that could have happened. And why do they say that? Well, first of all, I'm not going to try to explain that neurobiologically because I'm not qualified to do that. But I can say from experience and observation, great crises can act like storms that clear the air, that enable us to come back even during, but after, and notice from a clearer space what's going on, who we are. We're more able to align ourselves with who we truly are, with our heart's deepest longing. And that's happened so many times. We've all heard many stories. Crises can focus the heart and mind like nothing else. So that observation brings me, I will say, to my refrigerator, because there's a magnet on my refrigerator. And it's a poem by the 17th century Japanese poet, Mizuta Masuhide. He was a poet. He was also a samurai. And what he observed, what his poem was, barns burnt down, now I can see the moon. Barns burnt down, and now I can see the moon. And it occurred to me not too long ago, looking at that, like, wow, that's the topic for tonight's talk. Barns burnt down, and now I can see the moon. Now, I'm not implying that everybody can see the moon once their barn burns down. Obviously not so. Many of us can be thrown outside our window of tolerance and it can be traumatizing. It is traumatizing. But some, and apparently Masuhide was one of them, his barn burned down and he saw the moon. And I'd like to point out a little historical note. He was a samurai, so that means he didn't have a barn. Farmers had barns, but in that really rigid Japanese society, it was a feudal society, a samurai did not. He gave his allegiance to his overlord, and as a result, he fought. And it's very possible that the barn burning down was a metaphor for the devastation, perhaps of his property, but more likely of his overlord's property. They called him a daimyo, his lord's property. The barn burnt down. People must have been killed, maybe his own family, Masuhide's family as well. In any case, whatever the specifics were, and I don't know the specifics of the story beyond that poem and the fact that he was a samurai, the comparison holds. Our barns are burning now. in many, many different ways. They're burning all around us. So there's a tiny little poignant symbol of the devastation that I've been noticing here. And that is, and maybe some of you have seen it too, the shop called Charlottesville Piano on Rio Road. Maybe some of you have seen it. The store has been there for years. And I don't know the owner. I've never been in the shop, but I pass it regularly. And I've always empathized with this endeavor, because to be trying to sell pianos or trying to sell pianos in our technological age, it said this owner had to just love music and love what he was doing. And moreover, I'll say what really also caught my attention are 3 signs out in front of that shop. They are hand-painted pictures of a lyre, which is an ancient musical instrument. And the lyre is painted in gold. In fact, sometimes I've passed it and the sun is shining on it and they just shine brightly. And to me, that was a sign of just how this owner must really love that shop and what he or she was doing. So I guess it was just last week sometime I passed by. Of course, they closed down, as many, many businesses did during lockdown in the spring. Didn't open since, to my knowledge. But when I passed last week or so, there was a large moving truck, piano specialist, outside the shop, emptying out the shop. And now, because I passed by again in the last few days, the shop is empty. And what's left are the 3 signs. And somehow to me, that just seems so poignant as one little tiny example of the devastation that's all around us. Who knows what the owner and family are facing? What kind of, if it's bankruptcy, what kind of hardship? Like so many people we pass on the streets, like ourselves. So offering that up, it's all around us. And it is with us too. So I know there isn't every one of us has at some point asked questions, deep questions like, what's it all about and what am I doing here? And as I said, I think that crises can make us ask these questions with greater intensity than usual. I think we're really forced into the intensity of that. Like questions like, is there a way for me to be now that I hadn't seen before? A deeper way of embodying life? Is there something for me to do that I hadn't seen before? To be or to do? Is there a service? What am I being called to? What's my authentic way of being and doing right now? And I thought, in a way, when we are forced into this kind of truly intense questioning, searching, it becomes a gift. The crises become a gift in that respect, at least. The Buddha said, and to quote from him, and it's a quote from the Dhammapada, he said, your work is to find your work, and then with all your heart to give yourself to it. Your work is to find your work, and then with all your heart to give yourself to it. And I think that is what this crisis allows or compels many of us to turn toward. What is my work right now? And of course, this isn't talking about a profession. It's your calling right now. And that can change many times if we truly question over a lifetime. As you grow and as circumstances change, finding your work, about realigning your responses and the way you embody life with what life is calling for, and doing it with compassion for all. I think that's what's up. That's what's in front of us. And I think IMCC right now is providing an example of that because, as you know, and Laura mentioned it last week as an announcement, IMCC is questioning, should we in new ways become engaged In social action, we already are engaged, as many of you know, and many of you are part of. We're part of this Charlottesville Clergy Collective. Many of us, I mean, like for 10 years, Ruth King has been here, and many of us have taken training, race training, awareness of race training with her. Some people in our Sangha, in our community, are engaged now in intensive 1-year training with Ruth. And many of us have been, are currently engaged in our White Awake or White Awareness groups, in which we're investigating white privilege and implicit bias, the things that white people, of which I think almost all of us are, have grown up with and haven't noticed, just part of the scenery. And now we're being called to notice. We've been doing that in IMCC. So this is wonderful. And it's a beginning. And we are looking now to see if there are other things we should be doing. And we're talking about, it's being talked about, policies being formed, and you will be told about it, invited into it, invited into it. So this is how IMCC is the question, how do we realign? Do we realign in some meaningful way? So it's about exploring, you might say, exploring activism and living from an awakening heart. I think that is a phrase that has come to me as I was thinking about this. I really like it. Activism as a way of living from an awakening heart. And then I'd like to tell you of another story. And this is a story of a friend of mine. Her name is Mariana. Mariana lives in New Zealand. And she's been a long time Vipassana, that's insight meditation, insight mindfulness practitioner, for really meditating for many years. Mariana and her husband had a property, a home outside of Auckland, New Zealand, where they had many acres, and she raised herbs and sold them. She was quite an expert and sold them. But Mariana has also suffered from muscular dystrophy since she was a child. And she has been an amputee for several years. Since that operation, she has lived alone, no longer with her husband, but she continues to be active. She's attended retreats, she's done Meals on Wheels, she's done everything that she could, given her condition, to help, to be of service. So her condition has continued to deteriorate over the years. And several years ago, she told me that, you know, she said she could live with it. And this is only part of it. She had a slew of other physical conditions as well. She says, as long as I can do something, I'll be okay. And she's been in some really difficult physical positions, but I spoke with her a few weeks ago. And when we first greeted each other, I said, so how are you? And she said, I'm good. And then she explained to me. And she said a few months ago, the pain in her good leg became so intense she could no longer stand on that leg. And that means any time that she stands, she has to stand on the prosthesis. And this is not a good thing. She can't stand for more than a minute at a time. So she's mainly wheelchair bound. She still lives alone. Now she does get out, she drives. And because this is New Zealand and she lives in a fairly small town, you know, she doesn't have to plan it. She'll go where she needs to go, and she knows somebody's always going to be there to help her take the wheelchair out of the car, and they'll always be there to help her put it back in and give her help wherever she is. So that's a beautiful side of it. But she told me that a few months ago, she had been really depressed about her situation. And then she said, one day she stopped and she realized, she said, well, this is the way it is. She said, there's nothing I can do about it. And then she said to me, she said, I don't know how much longer I have to live, she said. But whatever it is, she said, she realized back that day when she sat herself down, she said, I can either continue to be miserable or else I can choose to be happy. And I choose to be happy. And this is what she told me. She seems to be doing it. this isn't just kind of like a New Year's resolution for her, you know, one of those things that you make one day and break the next. I'm not saying that she's happy all the time, but from what I understand, she really does know how to be happy, and she is following that. She is a deep practitioner. She knows how to redirect her mind when it gets into unwholesome spirals, as mine does. You know, I will just tell you, I told her, you really inspire me. It's such an inspiration. And what I realized after we talked, she does have agency. She does have something to do, confined as she is to her wheelchair. Most of us think about having agency or some power and not being helpless as doing something in terms of external environment, but she has learned, and she is using the most important kind of agency, and that is the agency of her attitude. She has changed that. There she has power, and she's done it. She's doing it. And as I said, I told her that she really inspires me, and she's really a practical person. And she said something like, oh, well, it's just the obvious choice. You know, so this is how she is, really practical, but it's not obvious. It's not obvious at all. I will say that in the context of our talk today, Mariana's barn has burnt down, and Mariana is seeing the moon. And the moon is being happy. None of us know what is in store for us. We can never know. We never know the circumstances that we're going to face. But the only thing, what we do know is the kind of decisions that we can make, the kind of decision like Mariana made. So I think, and I'd like to kind of sew these pieces together, at all times, whatever our circumstances, we can listen. We can listen for what is our work in the current circumstances. And it realizing, you know, it doesn't need to be going out in a major way and serving many people. For some who are called to that and who are in the position to do it, that's it. That's their work at that time. Mariana's is much, much more reduced. Is it any less important? I don't think so. She is offering something unconditionally. She's offering what she can, and that's all any of us can do, ever. So what I've just, to kind of review what I've just done, I've been saying that the crises can be a catalyst for us to see more clearly. And I've given us two examples, spoken about IMCC and about Mariana. And now I'd also like to, in a sense, in a way, expand this idea about seeing more clearly. Crisis can be a way for us to awaken into boundlessness, into a shift in consciousness, where life, as we understand it on the conventional level, is recognized as being not the whole story. That there is something else that has always existed, does exist, that all of it is an expression of, hard to say this, hard to put it into words, because it can't really be put in words, but we can realize that. And this is what, to go back to the poet Masahida, this is what I hope Masahida found out when he saw the moon. Barns burnt down, now I can see the moon. I don't know, maybe his moon was he was going to go out and slaughter the rival warriors. But, you know, I hope not. I'm hoping instead it was that he saw this profound truth. Because obviously he was a man, well, whatever, not to go further into, that's what I hope. I hope that was what his moon was. This profound truth that I've just mentioned is what the Buddha has been talking about. For example, many of you have heard, I know we've repeated it various times at IMCC. He said, and this was in the Udana scripture, he said, "Oh monks, there is an unborn and unbecome and uncreated and unfabricated." Okay, that's the same truth. This is hard to understand. obviously. It's a little bit opaque, I think you would say. I mean, he spoke quite a long time ago, but you know, no matter how you say it, he was talking about something that is formless, that you can't see, but that is always there. And it has been repeated by spiritual beings throughout history and a variety of, a wide range of spiritual traditions. So that's what the Buddha was saying. And I think, I'm hoping or think that maybe this is what Masahida saw when he saw the moon. He wouldn't have seen those exact or heard those exact teachings from the Buddha, because that form of Buddhism was not in Japan at the time, but Zen Buddhism was. And Zen says it time and again, over and over. Form is emptiness and emptiness is form. You've heard, I know I've talked about that before. Over and over, it's being said in Zen. So I thought that I wanted to share with you tonight what I see as my work, because this crisis is also, I have been thinking about it as well, asking these same questions, and trying to listen. And I find that I have been confirmed in my sense that my work as a teacher is to continue to focus on the natural state, and to try to illustrate how it is both the same and as well as not the same as our conventional world, to try to make that clear. Now, that's a very general statement, and it's simply pointing in a direction. And I don't want to elaborate on how I do that. I'll do that I'll try to do it some other time. But I will say that with regard to my work, it's taken me years to really recognize that, hey, wait, that's my work. I hadn't, in the sense that the Buddha said, find your work. I hadn't really thought about it like that. It's just come along with me over the years. And as I've told some of you, it was a realization that kind of clobbered me when I was very young, and I didn't know what to do with it. And the answer is you do nothing with it. There's nothing that can be done with it. That's the point. But what I've realized is that it is important to talk about it. Some of you here know this already. This I know for sure. Some of you don't. And I think it's really important to say it, for you to hear it when you haven't and don't know what exactly it means. Maybe your heart knows, the heart has a feeling about it, but there is a difference between experience and knowing it. It's important to hear it. Why? I can say that with utter compassion is because when it hit me, and I'll say hit, I was totally unprepared. I didn't know what in the world it was. My work is to provide a context so that you can see where the spiritual path leads, where the contemplative path leads. And you'll have an understanding that if and when this opens for you, you'll know what's happening. You won't be then thrown into the kind of confusion that I was. So I'm realizing, this is my work. And I love that way. So I want to bring this talk to a conclusion right now. And in doing that, I want to invite you in these circumstances that we are now facing, these hard, frightening, even terrifying circumstances. Please be kind. Allow yourself to be kind to yourself, using and allowing yourself to be supported by us. And by that, I mean your community, by the practices, and keep asking your questions. What is your work? What's going on here? Where is this leading us? Not just in practical terms. Taking whatever actions you need and feel called to take, that's your work. But what's going on? Asking those deep questions. So I will say that thank you. That's what I'll say. Thank you for listening.